Mm.
Okay, so we were talking about you meeting Merrill Heater for the first time.
Yes, it was rough. Again, coming off of just coming out of Chuck Barris, and I don't believe I had an age. Yeah, no, I did. I was with Aaron Cohen at the William Morris Agency, and again, passed away, AIDS. It was just I can't tell you how destructive. Everybody knows, of course, it was destructive, but unless you were in the entertainment industry and in a very gay population, it was devastating. My best friend, Bob Allen, was a writer for us on dating and Newlywed Game, etc. I didn't even know he was gay. Not that matters. We used to get high together, and I didn't know he had AIDS and whatever, but he started slimming down and he still didn't tell me. And then he passed away. And what a wonderful guy. I mean, again, I can't even get started because I'll start crying. But yeah, it was just a horrible, horrible year of death and no work. And then I'm living in a tiny room in Hollywood, and somehow Merrill Heater gets in touch with me. He'd heard of me somehow. And again, he had just sold, again, I never said it. He had sold Hollywood Squares and Gamut and High Rollers. Those were his big 3 shows. So he had sold them, and he was going to do a show, a pilot called Malcolm. And he asked me to write some sample questions. The basic premise of the questions were they had to be 2 answers, and without getting too involved in the show, one contestant would answer the first part of the question the way, he was the third, this is not a good question, he was the 3rd president of the United States. One would say Thomas, and if the other one knew Jefferson was the 4th, he would say Adams, Thomas Adams. Well, it's not funny. But again, we got some funny answers out of it. But that was the premise of the questions. Any idiot could write those questions. So this idiot, of course, signed on. What I didn't realize at that time, because I went to Merrill's house, which was gorgeous. It's on Roxbury Drive. Jimmy Stewart lived 2 doors down across the street. Again, Lucy was right next door. And and again, Jimmy Stewart was a huge influence in my life. I mean, who doesn't love Jimmy Stewart? And I got to the point where we'd wave. In fact, I have a drawing here, if you want to see it, that he did for me of Harvey, the rabbit, which he signed for me, which I've got hanging up over there.
A drawing that he made, or just a pre-existing drawing?
Yeah, no, here, I'll show you.
Okay.
We got to the point where we were friends. He was driving a Volkswagen Rabbit, okay? And Jimmy was too tall. He had legs that went on forever. I don't know if you can see this, but I don't know how to do that. But this is a freehand with a Sharpie. He did this for me. I mean, not that he's an artist, but yeah. Anyway, that's Jimmy. Well, I got so much stuff. Again, I'm a movie buff, and I've got Spencer Tracy's first Fox film contract back there. Just that mint. I don't know where I am on Zoom. Do you see David Copperfield back there? Am I in the
I do. Yeah, the poster sheet or the lobby card.
That's from 1935. I've got about 100 of those. Anyway, it's worth a ton of money. It's mint condition, and I've got movie contracts. I've got movies are my life and always have been. TV. Yeah, I've got. Yeah, you've got Teenage Werewolf. I've got. You name the movie, I've got every Gable, Tracy, Jimmy Stewart. I've got hundreds of lobby cards. Again, mostly 30s and 40s. By World War II, not so interesting. By the end of World War II, because again, all the studios kept all the same actors. Gable was still playing Gable in 1955, the same Gable that he played in 1931. So yeah, the 50s were not good years, although film noir came in, Mitchum, and people like that. Anyway, okay, back to boring David Greenfield. So Merrill hires me, and I can't work out of his house forever. We decide we're going to shoot at NBC. Why? Because the pilot was for NBC. Again, it's called Malcolm, and Merrill explains to me that Malcolm is a, quote, animated character who appears inside of a television set. So already I'm thinking, well, this is going to stink. Okay, this is hey kids, this is high def, why can't I
Virtual reality hologram.
I'm sorry?
Virtual hologram, pre-holograms.
Oh yeah, I wish. No, it was actually sticks that moved this cartoon, almost like a marionette, but not. Okay, it was just a face, and it could be, and the guy did a voice, but he was annoying. Okay, but Merrill liked this concept, and who am I to say? Whatever. The show was Malcolm with big letters, Malcolm. And again, yes, it's on YouTube for some reason. And the first job was to give me an office, which again, luckily for me, instead of sticking me in the studio, in the NBC offices or getting me an office somewhere else, there was one office right next to the Wheel of Fortune, stage. It was just one office. So I was there, and Janice Dricky, wherever she is, was my PA, my script coordinator. That was it. I produced the show. I wrote the show. Art Alisi, may he rest in peace, was Merrill's best friend. And Arthur and I have been friends for years. My very last show, Hawaiian Beach Party, we did together. He funded it. We went to Maui. I produced and directed it. One of the greatest guys I've ever met. Anyway, my first experience with Arthur, who got producer credit on it. I got associate producer credit, but we needed a host. Merrill explained to me that, he'd just done the first Battlestars with Alex Trebek, but he didn't want Alex for this because this was a comedy show. Not that Alex couldn't handle a comedy, because Battlestars was another incarnation of Hollywood Squares, except with 6 triangles. But he wanted somebody that could work back and forth. So I interviewed tons of people. One guy that came close was John Bennett Perry, who was father of Matthew Perry, who was on Friends. He was on Soap Opera, and he came close. And this is when I first met Debbie Reynolds, who would become a very dear friend, because Debbie Reynolds' studio on Vineland was the best and cheapest place for me to interview hosts. It was a big enough place that Merrill wanted to come over, and it was, but it was basically a dance studio. But Debbie was in between gigs. She wasn't making many movies at that point, and this is before she started getting into her Debbie Reynolds Museum. Little did I know, a year later, she'd be doing Battlestars, and we'd be working together every day. But I got to know her, and time was getting short. We had to shoot the show, and we went, okay, let's go with Alex Trebek, who I had never met. And we rehearsed the show a bunch of times, and Alex got it, but speaking for Alex, we didn't like the premise and the way the script was set up. And again, feel free to watch it. Jokes like, well, Alex, the show is called Malcolm, not Alex. See, that's my name up there. It was not funny. Alex is too professional to come off it as ill at ease. He's a very good host, but it was clear it wasn't going to work, I think when it didn't sell, I know I was happy, because again, it was an old TV set, old round tube TV set on a podium, and it was basically on wheels, and we just had a prop guy behind wheeling it out, very old school. And it was okay. But the good news, so it didn't sell. All right. But I got my name up there. I'm associate producer on a Merrill Heater show. Within weeks, NBC said, no, we're going to put Battlestars back on. So boom, boom, David Greenfield hired to co-produce Battlestars. But he brought in Jay Reddick. Jay Reddick had produced the original Hollywood Squares. He also did the movie Rabbit Test with Joan Rivers. Joan had been a big part of Hollywood Squares and a big part of Jay's life. So Jay came in, but Jay was just going to be kind of piecemeal producer. Jay was going to be writing the jokes, and he had his own writers, and they would come in occasionally, but I was responsible for the rest of the show. Now remember, I had only done relationship shows. I didn't know. So I hired 2 contestant coordinators, Fred Shaheen and Fred Wasbrook. changed his name to Fred Westbrook, who wrote the Encyclopedia of Game Shows much later, and they were great. And had a couple of good writers from Hollywood Squares. But I'll tell you something horrible and interesting. Agism, okay? Agism caught up with me in my late 40s. Again, I'm jumping around because I do, because it's good for my cardiovascular.
Yeah.
And I noticed in my late 40s, and Woody Frazier said to me once upon a time, if you don't have your own production company by the time you're 40, forget about it. And he was right, because once you're in your 40s, everybody else is in their 20s. And the 20-year-olds really don't want the 40-year-olds around. Perfect example, and I'm going to jump one last time. Andrew Golder, I produced Debt for him at Disney. And Andrew used to be a runner at Kushner Lock, where Harry Friedman and I had worked and sold a show. And now Andrew was producer, EP of Win Ben Stein's Money and Debt. Okay, Debt was a ripoff of Jeopardy. Mm-hmm. And I'll go back to Merrill in a second. And sorry, train just derailed.
About ageism.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah, showing my ageism. So I learned that later, but a couple of guys came in and they were probably good writers, but they were too old for the staff. They were in their 40s. And I wasn't mature enough. I wasn't open enough to hiring somebody that wouldn't fit in with the group. Now, that was probably the correct thing to do because it would have made everybody else uncomfortable. But on Win Ben Stein's Money, Andrew hired Mike Metzger, okay, who I'm telling you was a great producer. But at this point, Mike hadn't worked for years. This is now 2000. And Andrew hired Mike to work on Win Ben Stein's Money. And the problem with hiring your old boss is it's really, really tough to tell your boss, no, that doesn't work, or rewrite the person's stuff, let alone fire, which is what happened. Mike, I don't know, Mike's contract, whatever, but Mike was doing a great job, but again, just didn't fit in. And I felt so badly when he did it. I felt worse for me because talk about a show I was not prepared to do, Debt was it, but I jump ahead. All right, so Malcolm didn't go. I'm doing Battlestars, never worked on a celebrity show before, and never worked with Alex, except for Malcolm. But the show just kind of worked. I started briefing celebrities and got back into my newlywed game persona, except now with stars. And it worked most of the time. The way the show works, the way all of only Merrill Heater, he was so clever. We did the same show a bazillion times, okay? Hollywood Squares had 9 squares. Battlestars was the same gosh darn show, except with 6 triangles. The new Battlestars, 6 triangles, okay? Then we did All Star Blitz, and that was 6 squares, and we added a phrase, okay? But we had we only had 4 celebrities, but 6 squares. 4 celebrities, 6 on Battlestars. In between, we did a pilot Hot Numbers with 4 stars, and then we did Hollywood Teasers. That was the last one we did. I gotta have to look that one up. It was like 1999, 2000, whatever. It was Rickles, Pam Anderson, Ed O'Neill was on Married with Children at that point, and that one didn't sell either. But it was a great pilot, except we overbooked it and poured Jill Ireland, who was a model, and Brian Austin Green, who was on 90210. I had to tell him, sorry, you're not on the pilot, because Mark Curry was big at the time, and we used Mark, and he got along better with Rickles. But Rickles and Ed O'Neill got along great at that point. Anyway, so Battlestars was fun. The way the show worked, people always wonder, gee, how did Paul Lynde always come up with a good answer like that? Or how did they come up with these jokes? And the only way you could do this for network, remember, we're back on network TV. I lived in syndication where, we could get away with, that's your number 2. If you were a horn, how would I blow you? I went from that to network TV and setting up jokes, etc. So each celebrity would get a card, and just the punchlines would be on the card. Okay, say number one, kale pectate. Number two, nah, 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 whatever. Okay, so each, and certain celebrities, like, a Charles Nelson Riley, who Charlie was great because if anybody didn't show up for any show, Merrill would call me and said, oh, Harvey Korman canceled for tomorrow. It's got a Scientology meeting. Okay, which he did. And at 9 o'clock at night, Charlie, yes, David. He always knew me. He would yell at my mom in the audience. You're responsible for him being it. You're responsible. I'm kidding. But Charlie would always show up and he would sit in. But, they would get the jokes. Even, the June Lockharts of the world, they would get jokes. Vinnie Price, very funny guy, believe it or not. Frail, tall, wonderful guy. But he was great at deadpan jokes. So everybody, I'm sorry, I'm going through the explanation.
Fine.
So they'd have the joke card, but they wouldn't know what the setup was. Okay. And so, for example, on All Star Blitz or Battlestars, we'd have what we call the slush pile. Now, it was my responsibility, just questions in order, all different categories, hopefully interesting, as simple as, the color of houses in America. Most houses are painted yellow, but set up as a question. That's just facts like that. But so we'd have the regular slush pile, and then there'd be separate slots for other questions. Okay. And when I decided, not Merrill, they gave it to me. When I decided it was time for a joke, and usually I'd front load the jokes up, to the top of the show, there would be a light on Peter Marshall or Alex Trebek's podium, and they would go, you wouldn't see it, and they would go to that pile, okay, and say, Joshua, this is the national drink of Mexico. What is it? You'd look, I brief you to glance down at your card beforehand. At that point, you get the joke, and you'd say, kale pectate. And you get a laugh, okay? So they know, all right, so there's the first joke. But again, they didn't know, they'd have the joke answers, but they didn't know what the question was. Now, likewise, there was a monitor in front of each celebrity. Nobody knew this until now. And on everybody's screen, they'd have two possible answers, okay? And they would do their best to give the right answer, okay? We wouldn't tell them which was right, but both were believable because we couldn't leave it up. No celebrity would want to do the show if they actually had to come up with something themselves and then look stupid by coming up with a bad answer. By us providing them with two very possible potential answers, anybody and everybody was willing to do our shows. And some celebrities were great and some were not. Jerry Seinfeld, we gave him a shot. He had a new show coming out. I forget the name of it. And I think it was called Sign something. And again, gave him the joke, but Jerry, because he and not a bad guy at all, but Jerry insisted on doing a few jokes before he got to the joke. And we didn't have that kind of time, and it kind of ruined the timing of the show. And we never had him back. And I'm not putting him down, but it just worked easier. And the pros, like Debbie Reynolds. I mean, Debbie was on almost every show. We didn't have a center square or permanent people, but Rosemary was always on. Abby Dalton, June Lockhart. There was a lot of people. Ted Shackelford was popular. Ed Begley Jr. was always on. Martin Mull, Fred Willard were always on. Battlestars. Oh my God, those two guys. And Martin Mull and Jim J. Bullock. Do you know who he is? He was on.
Yeah, of course. Too close.
Jim J would come up with outrageous things, and a lot of times he would talk over Martin Mull, and Martin would just get so pissed off at him on the air. Jim, there was constant bickering. We tried not to put them on the same shows, but Jim J was just all over the place, kind of like Pee Wee was back in the dating game days. But there was one particular, tapings all went well. Alex was easy to work with, and Jay Reddick was dealing more with Alex and the questions. I was dealing more with the celebrities, just as I had with the contestants on Newlywed Game, Drink Break. Now, it's one tape day. Remember, we're doing 5 shows in a day. And it was the first time we had Leslie Nielsen and Howie Mandel on the show. Okay. They weren't dating, it was just 2 different celebrities happened to be on the show. And they meet, whatever. And just prior to the show, they both have these little devices that I'll just say the word, that farted, okay? They made farting sounds, all right? And the show started. I assumed, actually until recently, I assumed Howie, being the comedian, at that point, Howie was doing the glove over his head, and he had an odd way of speaking, and that was his character. You know, he was not the Howie Mandel that is on America's Got Talent, which is the real nice Howie. So I assumed that Howie had given Leslie this other little farting machine, and during the taping of the show, every few minutes, and just and Merrill comes over to me real angry, not at me, said, David, we assumed it was Howie. He said, go up there, because you had to climb up. On all of these shows, you got staircases, you got to climb up, and go up there and tell him to stop. So, okay. And, you know, I said, God, there's no way we can cut all these out. You got to stop it. Turns out it was Leslie Nielsen that was doing it all the time. And there was Leslie, it was a practical joker, and Leslie gave it to Howie. It was just me, not really having met either of them before, that just didn't know. I assumed that it was Howie. And I don't think Howie ever did it, because Howie was still young, and, you know, he wasn't really on TV a lot, and he was good on the show. I mean, so was Leslie, but they just wouldn't stop. So, you know, for that show, in sweetening, you know, where normally, you know, you could put additional laughs or applause over, but there was nothing to laugh or applaud over. So producers' worst case scenario was always, so, you know, on those particular episodes, rather, there was a lot of coughing. Every time there was the sound, you know, the cough, and that covered it to get us through those 5 shows. But otherwise, yeah, it went really well. And again, for me, my best memories of that show, oddly enough, Debbie Reynolds had broken her toe. And so she'd come early, and I'd eat lunch quick, because she was like a second mom to me. I mean, I talked to her about my date and who I was dating and what was going on. And we just hung out together. And again, we knew each other from the Debbie Reynolds studio. So we just, I don't know, we just clicked. Yeah, I don't know, we were friends until she passed away. But yeah, so it was a terrific show and a great experience. And why Merrill trusted me to do that, I have no idea. But we went right on from Battlestars, which was canceled after 13 weeks. Merrill comes up with another show. He says, David, he didn't talk like that. I don't know what that means. But again, there's still, I'm looking at my resume, 1985. All Star Blitz. Okay, he tells me about the show. It's the same damn show again, except All Star Blitz, you know, now has Wheel of Fortune, you know, Saturday Night Football, you know, whatever the hell, you know, look, Ma, no hands, whatever. And you'd reveal, you know, Star would answer a question, you'd reveal a piece of the puzzle, same setup, except with Peter Marshall this time. Hello, stars, you know, hello, Peter. Exactly like Hollywood Squares, except different. And this was for ABC now. And so I produced that, and I knew more about producing at that point, and I was a little more sure of myself. That show went very well, but I told Merrill from the get-go, Blitz. You know, one thing about Merrill, we're very tight, excuse me, and again, we always worked out of his house. And I could not convince him that that was a terrible name for a show, Blitz. And Merrill would always say, no, because he played cards. He said, you blitz them in cards. I said, but it's Blitzkrieg, you know, and I mean, not that World War II happened yesterday, but Blitz, it's not it's like me going back to Dave Greenfield and Johnny Carson. It's just, yeah, All Star Blitz. I watched All Star Blitz last night. Really? Were you sick to your stomach? You know, it sounds like something you'd eat at Spago's. Yeah, I won't say that's why the show didn't last, but again, we were on and off in 13 weeks, and there I was unemployed again. But it was a great learning experience, and I made a lot of friends, And yeah, and Merrill, I knew Merrill would always be there for me, and it was nice having an EP with that kind of reputation to be there and knowing, that he was going to be there, kind of like Stone Stanley was years later. Okay, so moving right along. On Battlestars, I met Harry Friedman, and excuse me.
You're fine. We need to take a break. We can.
No, well, I just got to clear my throat, and people will find it because I'm 67 years old. Here's how you clear your throat when you're old, and it still doesn't work. Okay. So I meet this guy, Harry, and we immediately clicked. And so while I'm doing Blitz, while I'm doing all these, Harry and I are starting to write shows together. And we started to get development deals. And we would, back then, the way it worked was if somebody liked your show, and we would go pitch everybody, and we were a good match because Harry was a little bit older than me, but more reserved. Okay. And I was the hippie, outgoing, funny one, oh, he's just crazy. And Harry was the down-to-earth guy. And everything clicked. When it came to writing, we'd work together at his house. And I could never ask for a better writing partner, because if I said, no, this word is better, he would defer to me. And like we were writing just the opening of a show called The Second Time Around, which we did so many times. We did a presentation. We almost sold that show 4 times. It was a husband, wife, and an ex-wife against a husband, wife, and an ex-husband, which somebody else did later on. And but we got 3 different presentation deals. I would host it. I hosted the first one at the Colborne Theater. Harry would announce, and then it was up to me. But I had produced other shows. I had presented many shows. Anyway, we start writing together. So we're trying to sell those shows. And at the same time, we get $10,000 to produce these presentations, but we weren't allowed to take any of the money. So we weren't getting paid, but we were getting deals. And we would go out and we pitched. We had a lot of shows, and people generally liked us. Occasionally, like this time, I believe, Harry and I were both up. A guy named Hiam Saban had come out from Israel and was writing music for Deke Entertainment, who did cartoons. And so he was a musician, and he wanted to get into television. And there's a girl named Ellen Levy who had come out from NBC, and she was working for him. And during my Chuck Barris days, somewhere in that mix, Metzger and Friedman and I produced a show of hers called Your Word or Mine, which was a very good show, but again, didn't sell. And so Ellen worked there, and Ellen recommended that I come in and produce a show called I'm Telling, which was, oh, here we go again, a kid's version of the Newlywed Game. Okay, and I said to Hiam, I'm Telling was brothers and sisters, and I said, Hiam, this is so much like the Newlywed Game. Chuck's gonna sue us. No, David, don't worry. All you got to do is you make 5 changes in the show. You have to show 5 differences between these shows. Listen to me, okay? The great thing about Hiam was he was still learning English. I mean, he knew English, but when we were in meetings, there were certain words that he would pick up on. I remember so vividly, loquacious. He fell in love with that word. He is very loquacious. So the way he said it, it was kind of funny but cute. But Hiam was brilliant. And the way Hiam worked, again, it was a music company show, provided music for Deke, then slowly started buying up Japanese footage for his own company, and without telling Deke, started pitching his own cartoon shows against Deke. Because the NBC NBC Saturday morning just fell in love with Hiam. And because he's very, if you don't know Hiam Saban, very charismatic, handsome. His license plate back then, it was Rolls Royce, one risk taker. So going back to I'm Telling, I started doing run-throughs. Yes, again, I had hosted all the rehearsals of Newlywed Game, and this stuff just came naturally to me. And plus I love kids. Remember, I started as a children's entertainer. And just like Marc Summers, we just had an affinity of dealing with kids and getting along with kids. Plus, we're but Mark and I are both immature, and we relate to kids and we talk like kids, and anyway. So we're doing the run-throughs of I'm Telling. Hiam says we got to make 5 changes. Okay, so 5 changes. Instead of 4 couples, we had 3 brothers and sisters. Instead of giving away points, we gave away dollars. I mean, the changes were that minute. Now, at this point, again, we're getting ready for a live presentation. Everybody knew I was going to host it. And went to the Colbert Theater, and Brandon Tartikoff was president of NBC, and he came to the show, and we made these 2 changes, and I hosted it. And I knew while we were doing it, I mean, I knew even before, when I was doing the run-throughs, Saban has a way of laughing that's just out. He just has a huge laugh, and he would come to the run-throughs in the afternoon. He and his partner Shuki Levy, and they loved it. And Ellen was a little tougher because it was her baby. And anyway, I did the presentation, we sold it, but whereas I expected to host it, I was still pretty darn Jewish for TV at that time, okay? I've got a Jewish nose, and my name is Greenfield. And even though Seinfeld was on the air, there were no Greenfield game show hosts, and NBC had no live action shows at that point. They were totally animation. So they wanted to put I'm Telling on at 10:30 Saturday morning. So they had us interview people with cartoon voices. And I said, oh boy, this is going to go downhill fast. And we hired a guy who is terrific person. His name is Laurie Faso. And he's a voice on Teenage Mutant what is it?
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, that one. And many more. I mean, you name it, he's doing it now. Because again, you can get older and do voiceover. He had a wonderful voice for that, but he had never hosted anything before that. We didn't do a pilot on the show. And before I start clearing my throat again, the show didn't work because you needed to, like Bob Eubanks, you needed to know when to go in there and explore and when to step back. And I couldn't stop the tape every 5 seconds. And so I just let it go, and there were 40, in my estimation, pretty bad shows. And it wasn't Laurie's fault. He was not trained to do that. He did the best he could. And again, he's a great voiceover talent. And yeah, that was that. So we were doing that. Same time, we're writing cartoons in the office for syndication or to sell, and again trying to match English words into the Japanese mouths. And then I've got an office there, and for whatever reason he made me VP of development and production. When you've got no shows on the air except one, okay, it's really easy to be VP of development and production. But it sounded great. I had a business card, and Saban Productions, nobody heard of us. We had 20 people in the company, but at least we had I'm Telling on the air on NBC, and that was pretty good. And Andy Hayward from Deke got an EP credit because Hiam had made a deal. Okay, at this point, Andy and Hiam, their friendship was kind of ending because they were going against each other. Going back to one point, I believe Harry and I were both up for that job on I'm Telling, but I got it not because I'm a better producer, but only because of my newlywed game and dating experience. Harry is a better producer and knew more about producing, even though through freeze frame, I was more well-versed. I still wasn't a producer. I still, again, I didn't know budgets. I didn't know any of that stuff, but Harry did. Anyway, I got that gig, but rarely did Harry and I in competition. And we were still out while we're doing this. And through the years, Harry and I were still partners, but he's producing one show and I'm doing another show. He's producing Caesar's Challenge and I'm producing whatever. Anyway, that's just the way it works. So I stayed with Saban, and I had created, based on my freeze frame show, which was more TV and movie trivia, I still wanted to do that kind of stuff. And when I was a kid, you asked me earlier what I watched. I always watched Superman on TV. I loved Superman, Lois Lane, Jeepers, Mr. Kent. So I wanted to do a TV trivia show, called it Couch Potatoes. Once again, wrote the script, wrote a show, no clips, but trivia stuff. And for the presentation, which I did at Saban, again, I did it live, I hosted it. It's been on YouTube a zillion times. And I had Donna Douglas come in as Ellie Mae Clampett, looking for pet pig Susie. And I had little hokey jokes, are you still in Beverly Hills? No, we moved to Sherman Oaks. Now we're the Sherman Okies. What does that mean? She's looking for a pet pig. When she leaves, I said, I was in the mood for a Susie lettuce and tomato sandwich. Pet pig named Susie. Ha, 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 ha. Anyway, by the mere fact that celebrities would come in and stay in character was cool for the audience. And for me personally, and likewise for Marc Summers, who, I'm dancing around the place, when we had done, Merrill Heater and I had done a pilot called Lucky Rollers, which again, it's high rollers redressed. And Alex was doing that. So Alex hosted that. Marc Summers was our warm-up guy. And he was terrific. Suit and tie, because Marc has OCD and he didn't go anywhere with his suit and tie, just perfectly linen and just looked great, and did the best warm-up I've ever seen. Although Michael Berger is damn good too. And Marc and I became friends, and I said, Marc, if I ever get sell a game show, I'm going to have you host an adult game show. And anyway, he was doing Double Dare. I got him as host of Couch Potatoes. And for us, it was fun. For Marc especially, he was looking forward to Howdy Doody and Buffalo Bob Smith. I was thrilled. For Superman, I had Noel Neal and Jack Larson, who played Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane. I had them. And it's the only time that I had pictures taken with anybody. And so it was fun. It was easy. I wrote that show. And Dennis Rosenblatt directed, who's doing Penn and Teller now. He's a great director. And it went very smoothly, went fine, except Saban was carrying on. He was doing Power Rangers at this point. And just going back to Saban, I'm now at the studios, working out of the studios, because my office stunk. All these costumes had come over from Japan for this, quote, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which made no sense to me whatsoever as a title. And all these alien costumes, which smelled like I don't know what, but they were too close to my office, so I was thrilled to get the hell out of there. But Hiam did, while I'm doing Couch Potatoes, had me write up a comedy version of it, because they didn't know which direction to take Power Rangers. And I wrote a comic version of Power Rangers and another show called Mega Man, which I don't know if he sold or not. Because again, all of a sudden, Hiam is selling shows left and right. The fact that he sold Couch Potatoes, which again is a niche show, and again, not an evergreen show. You don't see that on in reruns because, again, the shows that I grew up with, nobody's going to know. I had Sarah Gilbert on the show from Roseanne, and people will know that, but I didn't know who Sarah Gilbert was, and I had to watch a Roseanne episode to be able to write how they'd walk in. Whereas, Hill Street Blues was very popular at the time. Dennis Franz, he played Andy Sipowicz, and he was on LA Law. He always played the tough guy. I don't know if you know him, a heavy set, big bruiser kind of guy. Yeah, he banged the door down, Summers! And, everybody came in a character, and they were all good, except for poor Natalie Schaefer. She was so old at this point, and, I tried to make her understand that she wasn't coming on the show as Natalie Schaefer. She was coming off of the island, playing Lovey Howell, and Thurston Howell the third is wherever I wrote him to be. And maybe she came in. And a lot of times I had them coming in looking for, whoever else was on the show, not realizing, oh my God, I'm on a game show set and now we'll talk about the show. And then they'd leave through the door. So it was a fun show for me to produce. And I appreciate Hiam Saban getting it sold for me. Again, it was my first created by on the air show. And what really was annoying though, to most people was I had 3 credits in a row. It was supervising producer David M Greenfield, written by David M Greenfield, created by David M Greenfield, all in a row. And it was just it seemed so self-serving at the time, but not that many people watched it. Well, I guess some people did. I don't know. It's on, again, they're on YouTube. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. Then I could have gone back to Saban, but he had moved on to other things. You know, one thing about Hiam, he was a visionary. I mean, again, Merrill was a great producer, and Merrill could produce those Hollywood Squares. He could produce game shows. Harry Friedman, who's currently doing Tic-Tac-Toe, he keeps going. He's older than me, but Harry keeps going. He loves producing, and he's great at it. I mean, look at Jeopardy and Wheel all these years. I mean, he's wonderful. You know, I'm not saying that because we were partners, but yeah. So there was really nothing for me to do with Hiam because I was a game show producer, and he wasn't going to do any more games. So Ellen stayed, luckily, and a guy named Joel Andrick, who had worked with me at Barris, he stayed, and he's still there. Ellen is retired. So I had nothing to do. Harry had nothing to do. And luckily, I had talked Harry into signing with my agent. I was with a great guy. His name is Richard Lawrence. I saw him, last time I saw Richard was with Harry Friedman, got his star on the Walk of Fame, I don't know, about 2 years ago. And it's the first time I'd seen him in years. And I saw Harry and gave him a big hug, and it was great, him getting a star. And anyway, Richard put us up. This guy had created a game, no, not really a game, it was a book or something like that called Critical Decisions. And they wanted to produce a pilot. And they had money for the pilot. And yes, Critical Decisions is on YouTube. And once again, Harry and I, after we'd done 3 presentations on second time around, we had done a show called The Know-It-Alls for Dick Clark. And once again, once we did the Know-It-Alls for Dick, they hired me afterwards. Again, not that I'm better than Harry, but because I was the host and I'm the cute, funny one, not that Harry's not handsome, they would tend to go with me, even though, in my estimation, again, Harry, better producer, and Harry's a much better executive producer, meaning being in charge. Again, just he was a journalist. He's just he's very talented. Not that I'm not, but we're very different. And that's why we meshed.
Thanks.
Anyway, so we wrote whatever the hell we wrote. We submitted it, and they liked it. And like, okay, fine. Now do a live presentation. So here we go again. You know, Harry and I in a theater, not getting paid, and Harry announcing and me hosting. And this was a little more complicated because it was more of a talk show where people would have to make critical decisions in 3 different categories, personal critical decisions, political. It was a more serious show. So I had to put on a serious face, if you can imagine that. And we had guests. We were talking, something about, at that point, models or Miss Americas were having ribs removed to become more attractive. And as silly as that may sound, somewhere in there, we got that at Miss USA on that show. And likewise, during the presentation, Richard Lawrence had brought Dick Van Patten in, who was on 8 is Enough, and he did a bit at the end. So the good news is, Harry and I sell ourselves. Okay, we're going to do the pilot. Now, this may sound crazy to you, but again, we're in between jobs, and we've done a lot of pilots. They offered us $60,000 each to produce this show. And Harry and I are like looking at each other. The guy who was in charge, his name was David Loring. He just passed away this year. And he was an interesting guy. To this day, Harry still does an invitation. Oh, I can't do it. But, oh, David, you in those colorful shirts. Because I've always been known for having rather flamboyant outfits and very colorful shirts, again, from the 60s and tie-dye and stuff like that. And I'd walk in, Harry's dressed like a normal businessman. And I was wearing the fashions of the 80s, and David Loring, oh, those colorful shirts. It's like, screw that, where's our money? So Harry and I are excited. We got this pilot, okay, and we're going to make we still can't quite believe it because we've been burned before, but $60,000 in cash was a lot of money to us for just a few weeks' work. So we get an office. I'm living in Topanga. We get an office right on Topanga Canyon Boulevard. We book Michael Landon. It was one of the last things he did. William Shatner and Donna Mills, who was on Knots Landing, if I'm not mistaken. Again, between her and Victoria Principal, I get those shows confused, but I'm pretty sure Knots Landing. Anyway, that show, I was scared of Michael Landon because he was producer, director. He'd done, Little House and Highway to Heaven. And I was scared this guy is, super producer. He's going to see right through me, because all of us, we're insecure amongst people that, produce big primetime TV shows like Michael. But again, he's a good friend of Mr. Carson's and just wonderful, down to earth. Shatner's just Shatner, he'll do whatever you want and say whatever you want. He's very easygoing. And Donna was fine. She was the steady one in the group, not terribly funny, but Michael made up for that. Michael Landon, Kebby, and wherever you are, very funny guy. And Shatner had his moments, and we had guest stars from LA Law, just cameos and stuff. And the show went great. And it was the first show that Harry and I finally were able to produce together. And it turned out fine, considering what it was, which was a non-game show, meaning it was a board game that didn't work as a game show. Kind of like Uno years later. At Stones Alley, we tried to develop Uno into a game show. It can't be done, okay? If it could be done, it would have been done by now. We all tried it. Anyway, so that killed off that year. Critical Decisions made 60 grand, and there we go. That's when I went over to Dick Clark, and because again, Harry and I did know-it-alls after that, which was a good show. Harry was going to bring it back or try and sell it a couple of years back. It was just a bunch of friends against another bunch of friends. Who's the biggest bunch of know-it-alls? So it was just that simple a premise, but then there were rounds to it, and the show kind of worked. Although during that presentation, again, all of this is live. Dick did the announcing for once and not Harry. As we got towards the end of the show, I'm realizing, and Harry's realizing, although we don't see each other, that the scoring is screwed up, and that somebody on the last round could possibly win the show. And that's what's going to happen. And I'm trying to, I'm live host. And that's why I always hosted these things, not just because I was good at it, or maybe still am, but when the producer is in charge, you can manipulate it. You created it, I wrote it, I don't have to memorize it. And if something's going wrong, you change it midstream. And you have to do that occasionally, especially if you're counting on one person to do something and they don't do it, you can't stop tape, and you just got to keep going. And that worked with every presentation, every live presentation I did. So yeah, know-it-alls, again, didn't work, but Dick Clark hired me for bloopers and practical jokes. And so I did practical jokes for a while, and that was fun. But again, what's odd about my career, it sounds silly to call it a career, but I guess it was. I didn't know what I was doing, okay? Chuck puts me on $1 a second. I didn't know stunt shows. Merrill Heater puts me on a quiz show. I'd never done quiz shows before, let alone wrote jokes. Now I'm doing a hidden camera show. Never did a hidden camera show before. Don't know how to hide cameras. What the hell do I do? So I did them, and Dick was a breeze to work for, very even keel, lovely man. His wife, Carrie, was his secretary, believe it or not. And Carrie was lovely too. And you'd only go, Dick, like Chuck, Dick was pretty much a hands-off guy. It was only when you really needed him. I was doing one joke at a bowling alley, and I won't name the star, but Lisa Gibbons, who was on ET, and I, we were setting up the joke. I was on camera too, being an announcer. She was a host. And as the person comes around, the payoff was always, if you never saw the show because you're younger than me, you're on bloopers or you're on Dick Clark's bloopers and practical jokes. That was always the payoff. So as the person came around, the electricity went down. Help! Okay. Barry Edelman, who has been with Dick Clark forever and still, I think, works for Dick Clark, writes Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve for Ryan. And and whatever other, I think they still do the American Music Award
Yeah, the MS.
or Country Music Awards too. Whatever. Dick's gone, but his son Rack, also very talented producer. A lot of people still there. Barry Edelman, one of the funniest guys. Anyway, good group of people. But yeah, I had no idea what I was doing. And I said, Barry, what do we do? So that's what we called Dick. And Dick, we thought he would yell or whatever, because how do you do that? He said, just explain it. Just explain what happened. And that's what we did, And so we wrote a little script and explained. And this was Dick being clever. This is how clever Dick was. We set it up so that the person who was playing the joke on the person is now going to come out and explain why he was getting this person. And what happened was the person we were playing the joke on was getting slimed. Okay? Now the person comes out, as Dick had suggested, okay, and explain. What I was going to do was dump the slime on him, but the power went out and da-da-da-da. What this guy didn't know was that we then set up another pail of slime so that while he's explaining how the joke got screwed up, we got him too. Okay, so the one who we were playing the joke on got back at the person it was a back and forth thing. But Dick came up with that, like just on the phone, and I wouldn't have thought of that, or if I had thought of it, I would have done it, or certainly run it by Dick. But that, that was Dick. And again, just patient. I never saw Dick even come close to yelling at anybody. But again, neither did Chuck. Even when he fired me, again, he hired me right back. I'm lucky. I worked with very few screamers, but we'll get to Love Connection. Yeah, so that was it for Bloopers and Practical Jokes. I wasn't very good at it. My mind, yeah, I don't know. I'm not a practical joker. It just, it was tough for me. I did one, which I liked with Mayim Bialik, where, if you can believe this one, do we have time for this?
We do, and then we may.
All right, just a quickie. It was kind of silly, but the premise was simply because we were going out on a ship, we thought the practical joke would play better or play well. And basically, scientists were working on a new invention where we could communicate with whales, okay? So way out at sea, presumably there's another ship, and the whales were sky hopping, and et cetera. And we convinced Mayim to speak into the mic and talk to the whales. And as she starts doing this, the guy who actually was Ron Weed, Kent Weed's brother at Dick Clark, he's, oh my God, they're reacting, and mine is buying into all of this, and she thinks she's talking to a whale. And I'm the whale, and I'm talking. There was an echo and a reverb on it. I'm going, ooh, ah, ah. And then finally, slowly, I would go, my, and I was slowly, and the other guys are talking, but I'm saying her name. I say, my, and then finally I did, you're on Bloopers and Practical Jokes. And she, oh, you, and yeah, and so that one worked. But it was fun. It was great working with Dick. But then, yeah, it was just time to move on. And I'm sure it was Bob Bowden, because it's always Bob Bowden. Telepictures wanted me to go work at Love Connection. Now, Love Connection had been on for years. Chuck Woolery 2 and 2. I had seen it. I didn't particularly watch it, but I knew it was successful. And so, I'm in between jobs. So I go meet this guy, Eric Lieber. And this was the toughest man I've ever met. I mean, he would yell, he would scream, and that's when he was in the office by himself. The staff was so afraid of him. You've heard this expression, Elvis is in the building, right? When we knew that Eric was coming over, there were actually lookouts, because Eric was had his own office in a different building, and we were in the Love Connection office right opposite where Beverly Center is now. Sorry, you're in Kansas, but it was prime real estate. And Love Connection was interesting. I was shocked when I came in, and you'll be shocked as well, because I was told on the first day, Louise Brooks had been there for years. It was always a 2-producer show. And there was a list that Louise had in her drawer of all the co-producers that she'd had. The one before me was John Ryder. The one after me was Larry Goddard, who I'd produced Dating Game with. He was with the guys. I was with the girls. But there was a list of 22 guys because nobody lasted longer than 13 weeks with this guy. But I did. But I came in and you had a contestant coordinator who's videotaping because you needed those clips. If you remember Love Connection, you'd always show clips of the people for the girl to choose or the guy to choose, depending upon. But what I didn't realize, and it was made very clear on the first week, and we didn't have computers. And that was about to change. David, there are no good dates on the show. What do you mean? There are great dates or there are bad dates. Okay, but there are no good dates, okay? But 90% of the people that went out on these Love Connection dates, it was a good date because it was a first date. So we had to, as the only show where I had to do this, and it was horrible for me at first, and then you kind of get used to it. You had to manipulate these people, and it was always easier to make it into a worse date than, you say, well, there must have been something you didn't like about her. Well, yeah, I didn't like, she got kind of a laugh that got annoying, but other than that, oh, she was great. So then you go to the other person, boy, that laugh of yours drove him crazy. Well, really, she said that to you? He said, wow, I know I've got an odd laugh. And I would do that, this simple stuff, wow, he thought your butt was really big, a lot of physicals. He said that? Yeah. And it was total manipulation over the phone, and you had to be good at that. And Louise was rewriting a lot of the stuff, but I, fledgling producer, was writing my own stuff as well as editing their stuff. The problem, of course, was every time you rewrote, it was on typewriters. We had 2 PAs who were great, but they had to rewrite stuff as well. So, I mean, there's all this rewriting on paper and carbon paper back and forth when computers were out there. And I'd use them at Dick Clark. So finally, I convinced Eric, the executive producer, to get us a fax machine, because we didn't have a fax machine, and that was important. There was no internet, there was no nothing, and 2 computers just for the PAs. The writers and I and everybody, we're still stuck rewriting stuff, or at least, we had to cross it out, but at least the PAs didn't have to, okay? 3 days into it, the fax machine and the computers are stolen. What I did, and I don't think I've told anybody this story in years, I bought a fax machine and I bought the same 2 computers. And I replaced them because I knew there was no way he was going to do it. And he was going to come down on the entire staff, and only his assistant, who was, I don't know, she in his pocket, but she was an okay person. She kept it a secret too. And, yeah, it cost me money, but it was worth it for the aggravation. So the show had to be totally scripted. And luckily, we had enough time at the studio. And likewise, I would brief them over, my people, let's say it's Portia and Jonathan, I had briefed them enough over the phone and convinced them that, because I would take what they said or what I helped enforce them to say and script it better than they could have, meaning script it for television so they wouldn't have to think about it. It's much easier to memorize what I said. For example, as one guy would say, oh man, she was kicking in the onion. He said that to me accidentally on the phone. And I said, what a great line. And I put that in. So kicking in the onion, kicking in the onion. And so I'd go back and forth and da-da-da-da. Okay. So now it's time. It's the first day in the studio, time for me to brief Chuck Woolery. And, I've got all my notes and I've met him, but that's it. I go into Chuck's in makeup, Dominique Graham, terrific makeup girl, who's now a realtor. And I say, okay, Chuck, I just want to go over the dates. This first way, he said, no. Just tell me if it's a good date or a bad date. I said, what do you mean? He said, just tell me if it's a good date or bad date. I'll wing it. It's like, how is he going to wing it? There are beats to the show. But Chuck, the one thing Chuck could do, and it's nothing against Chuck, was what happened next. That he was good at, okay? And Louise and I are, during the production of the show, we're in Chuck's eye line. Got to be in Chuck's eye line, because we had to keep Chuck, because he would not listen to my briefing, okay? He wouldn't know anything about the dates, and there were certain beats, certain things that he needed to do, and he would jump all over the place. So imagine Louise and I with cue cards, holding up, ask, to get him back on track. And it was a nightmare. And Louise was much faster and better at it. What happens next, you could do all the day. But to get him, it was just the hardest show I'd ever done. And Eric would come out from the booth. David, what does it say in the script? It says, she was kicking in the onion. What did he say on stage? She had a great butt. He said, that's the same thing. I mean, he would just, if the words weren't exactly the same, and these were not actors, he would just beat the crap out of you. It just
Verbally.
Oh yeah, verbally, of course, yeah. And just the meanest person for, I don't know why, that maybe I've ever met. And yeah, it was disappointing. So I made it through 13 weeks, and I said, and I didn't have another job yet. And Harry and I were still pitching shows when we could. And he asked me to stay. I was like, what? So I guess I was doing a good job. So he picked me up for another 13 weeks. But after that, it was like, because again, it was uncomfortable to have to do that, after doing, Newlywed Game and Dating Game and all kind of proactive, easy, letting people improv. I mean, that was the whole point of every single show I'd worked on, with the exception of the Merrill Heater shows, where it seemed like it was improv, but it was written, and these are celebrities, it just was a gruel. And again, if Chuck had let us brief him, it might have worked better, maybe not. But luckily, the audience was enamored of Chuck, and the show went on without me. So yeah, that was good.
You were added to the long list of people that had been hired, and the long list of co-producers.
Yeah, and I was thrilled that Larry got the gig after me, because again, it was all in the families. Then I'll gloss over this. Next show I did, CBS got it into their heads to fight the Tonight Show and Late Night with David Letterman, who did get another show after that morning show. And we did a show, I produced a show called The Perfect Score, which was, yes, another dating game. It was three guys setting up their best friend, because this guy doesn't know how to pick women, so we're going to pick women for you. How many times can I do the same premise? The answer is as many times as people are willing to watch it and pay me. And Harry did the second half hour, which was called Personals, based on personal ads. And that was with Michael Berger, who's a good friend of Harry's. Again, had been a great warm-up guy. He's a terrific host, and went on to host a show which was underrated, called Mike and Maddie. It was the Mike and Maddie show, Michael Berger and Maddie Monfort. And that was, just too short a show. I'll get to that. We did it was just funny. Harry and I had never had an hour block. I'm doing the first half hour, and he was doing the second half hour. His was for Rick Rosner, mine was for another guy. And mine wasn't very good, but I had fun because I was the announcer. But it was more of an announcer thing. It was a back and forth, kibitzing kind of thing. We'd start off the show. He would joke about me. I'd joke about him, but it wasn't scripted, and it was improv. It was okay. Harry's was, again, just like Harry, not more rigid, more properly developed. And mine was more free form. It was just a better show, I thought. But anyway, we were both canceled because, again, you can't beat Johnny Carson and you can't beat David Letterman with a stupid game show about the dating. So anyway, those went on, still back and forth with Merrill. And
Before we get to the next topic, can we do
yeah.
another stop?